In this video, we are going to take a look at some of the very basics of Figma through wireframing. And it's important to say that this isn't going to cover everything. I'm going to link to a few tutorials and articles that you should definitely go through to get a more in-depth view of everything in the program. And just like any new software, it's going to be a little bit frustrating at first. And the best thing to do is just to kind of hop in there and start making stuff. And you'll get the hang of it over time and it will make more sense. But for today, we are going to make wireframes just to explain the basic tools and to get you up and running in here. And a wireframe is basically a digital sketch. What it does is it conveys the information architecture of a screen, and it shows kind of the layout or structure of a page without any of the style. You can see some examples in this photo here on the cover. And wireframes are great because they let us get out and communicate our ideas just like sketching does without putting a ton of time into things. And when we create them digitally, we can prototype and test them with users before we put a ton of time into production. So for this video, we are going to wireframe a very basic user profile screen for somebody at a university. So I'm going to jump to my first drafts page, and then I'm going to paste in a photo of a sketch that I already done. And it's important to spend time working on paper first before you jump into your digital tools, because you'll always end up with something better. It's just digital tools give us too many choices at first, so it's really important to spend some time doing this on an actual project. But I'm just going to throw this in here for reference, and we will get started. Okay, so you can see that this is basically the layout of a phone screen, and so we need to get a canvas that looks like a phone. To do that, we are going to use the frame tool down here, which is the looks like a crop tool or a square with some lines coming off of it, or you can press F on your keyboard. And when I click that, I get some options over here on the right for various devices. I'm going to go ahead and just select iPhone 16, and you'll see that it gives us already some proportions for an iPhone screen. Whenever possible, you should use frames instead of rectangles, which is the tool right next to it. We could have drawn something with that, and it would look very similar. But the nice thing about frames is that we can put things inside of them, and you'll see that in just a second here. The first thing I'm going to do is kind of block off the top of screen here because usually our sort of system navigation goes up there and we can't really design anything in that space. So I'm going to take a frame, kind of stretch it across the screen here, and just move it up to the top. We don't have to be super precise with this, but you'll see as soon as I draw this in here, over here in my layers panel, you can see that this frame one that I just made is now nested inside that iPhone 16 frame, which is great because it helps us keep things organized. But this is really hard to see. So this is a good time to show you the properties panel over here on the right. This is a dynamic panel that it depends on what you have selected. So for example, if I have nothing selected, it shows me the color of the background of my page and a few other global styles and variables from the project. When I have the frame selected, it shows me some X and Y coordinates of it, the width and the height, some appearance properties, and what we are concerned with is down here, these fill and stroke options. If I hit the plus icon on fill, you'll see I get a color, and I can click on that to actually change that color. I'm just going to give ourselves, maybe we'll go with just kind of like a mid-gray for everything in here. So that's our first element on the page. If I look at my sketch, and maybe I'll scale this down a little bit so we can see a little easier. The next thing I want to throw in here is a space for a photo. And I'm thinking that this sort of user photo or avatar should be in the shape of a circle. I could find a circle underneath the rectangle tool over here under ellipse, and I could click and drag and hold shift and to constrain those proportions to make a perfect circle. But we are instead going to use another frame for that. So if I hold shift, it constrains the proportions while I scale things. So you'll see that I can get a shape where my width and height are exactly the same. I could add a fill in using the fill option over here again. And then I could grab the eyedropper and pick the same color. But if I undo that, another handy shortcut in Figma is to press I on your keyboard, and it will bring up the eyedropper tool, and you can select a color from somewhere else on the canvas. But right now, this is a square. We want it to be a circle. And so what we can do is over here in Appearance, you see this icon is for the corner radius of the shape. We can click and hold and scrub across that to round out those corners into a circle. So the frame tool and the properties are how we draw basic shapes on the canvas. Next here, you see that I have a space for a first and a last name. So the other important thing to know how to create when you are wireframing is text. And we do that with the text tool down here. So if I click on that and I click and drag across the screen, I create a text box like you would imagine basically any other program like PowerPoint or Google Slides. And we can type in there. Again, in the Properties panel, this is dynamic. So when I have text selected, you'll see I get information about that. Down here, you can change the typeface. Basically anything on Google Fonts you can find in here. I'm going to leave this as the default enter for now because again, we are wireframing, which means that we shouldn't be styling things right now. We're just creating kind of a structure. What I will do is play with these options up here under layout. You'll see that these, well, I guess if I highlight it, it doesn't show it. You'll see that these have some tooltips when I hover over them. Fixed size is what we were on. You can do auto height, auto width. What's nice about auto width, especially for things like labels, is that will adjust the size of our text box to whatever the length or the width of the text is. So I'm going to do that for the first name, and I'll do another one for the last name. Again, auto width over here. And then we could adjust the size and the weight of these things down here in properties. And we can actually, if I click and drag, we can do both of these at once because they share similar properties. And so those will be shared over here underneath typography. So let's go ahead and make those bold. And let's scale those up. Say something like 48, see how that fits in here. Okay, so there is our text. You'll see that down here I want to include information on the class of the user and also their pronouns. So we could, again, grab the text box, click and drag, but this is a handy time to show another shortcut in Figma. So we can actually select things and copy with Control or Command C, or right-click and copy, and then paste. We can also, if you hold the Option or Alt key while you're hovering over something, you'll get these two arrows overlapping. And if you click and drag and then release the mouse button and then release the Alt or Option key, you can duplicate anything that you're hovering over as long as it's not blocked. That's really handy, especially for iteration, because it works even on entire frames or canvases of stuff or groups. So we could even duplicate our entire screen if we wanted to. So some other text options that might be handy to show over here are the text treatment. So if I wanted to add some further differentiation, like maybe my labels, I want them to be small but all capitals. If you click these typesetting options, you'll get some additional text options. So you can select things like all caps or all lowercase or title case. For our purposes here, let's make these all caps. And then I'm going to go even smaller with this. And then I'm also going to increase the tracking or the space between the letters. Okay, so that's kind of our first section up here. This might be a handy time to start grouping some of these things together so that they are structured a little better and we could easily reorganize them. You can create groups in Figma. So for example, if I wanted to group this label together with its content, I could click and drag to select them both. I could hold Shift and select them, and then right click and select group selection or Command or Control G. But oftentimes, instead of using a group, sometimes it makes more sense to use a feature called auto layout in Figma. So I'm just going to ungroup these really quick and show you what auto layout does. If I group them, I could move them around and they would move as one unit. But if we add auto layout, which is this icon over here, or you can see the shortcut is Shift A, it automatically adds those items to a new frame, and then it sort of stacks those elements within that frame. So if I click and drag on this content here, you can see how it's adjusting the other item in that frame to slide above or below the content. So it controls both the size of the group as well as how the things within the group stack on top of or next to each other. So just as another example here, I select the minor in marketing, use the auto layout icon. You'll see it adds those to a group. And I'm just going to rename these things to make sure things are organized. And we can also easily control, you can see by this pink bar here and the blue bars around the frame, the space between objects in an auto layout frame and the padding around that. So for example, you can see here I don't have any space between. You can also find over here. If I increase this, let's say to 20, you'll see that it adds all this space between those items. And then we could start to do the same with our items up here. So auto layout doesn't just work with stacking things vertically. So if I want the first and last name here to be stacked or laid out side by side and make sure they're always grouped together, you'll see that when I add auto layout, it makes a best guess at how these things are. Down below, we created a vertical auto layout, but here it makes sense to keep these things horizontal. We can also nest these things. So if I wanted to group my first and last name along with the pronouns in class, I could again add auto layout. And you'll see now I have the first auto layout frame, which is then grouping our first and last name within it, and then these titles over here. Looks like in our next section, we want to change the color a little bit and add some organizations that maybe the user is a part of, and then we could do the same with courses down below. So it probably makes sense to add all of these things to a new box or a new frame. So I'm going to use the frame tool down here, click and drag. And then again, I can't see this. I'm going to add a fill, just make this a slightly darker or a very light gray. And then I want to use what we call chips as a UI element here. So these might be things like sports or clubs or organizations, anything that the user is a part of on campus. Again, here it probably makes sense to use a frame for the background of those chips, and then we'll put the text inside. And this will show you another cool thing that we can do with auto layout. So I'm going to hit F on my keyboard to get the frame tool. I'm going to go ahead and create a rectangle and make these just a slightly, oops, I didn't want to add a stroke, just so you know that's how you add a stroke. I wanted to add a fill. This is a slightly darker gray. And then we will put our text inside that frame. Now, because this text frame is a frame, if I add auto layout to this, you can also grow or shrink the size of the background here using that auto layout. So you'll see it made some guesses about the horizontal and vertical padding here. If I zoom in, you can see this is what those numbers are controlling. Let's say I just wanted, I don't know, 8 pixels of horizontal padding and maybe 4 pixels of vertical padding. You can see how that background shrinks to fit what's inside of it, and that can save you a ton of time. So for example, if we needed a bunch of these, and they all needed to be different things, you can see how the size of that adjusts. So I want to add auto layout to this whole section so that the height is determined by the stuff that's inside of it. So the first thing I'll do is create some of these nested frames, auto layout frames. So if I think about everything in web design as being in a box that is stacked either on top of or next to another thing, these chips are one group of elements. So I'm going to first add auto layout to these, and you'll see that our third auto layout option is wrap, which means that if the, oops, it looks like this one didn't make it in. Let's see why you're not in there. There we go. If the elements inside the frame would expand beyond it, it will rearrange the elements to wrap down to the next line. So that works for that. Now we want to stack organizations on top of these chips. So we could add auto layout there. So now you'll see we could rearrange the chips in the label. And finally, let's add auto layout to the entire organization section, which will let us grow or shrink the height of this depending on what's inside of it. So you'll see that this switched to a specific width, and the height is hugging the content. So instead, let's go ahead and expand the width of this to fill our phone screen canvas, and then we do want the height to hug the contents. And then you'll see that this extra space above and below is controlled by that vertical padding. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of how to work a few important things in Figma so that you can get started building stuff. From here, it's really a matter of building out all of that content. So for example, if I wanted to remake courses down here, I could duplicate this section, change the background color, or remove it rather, and change the content. But once you get a few elements in here, it becomes really easy to build something out or a loose sketch of something out digitally. So I hope that gives you a good idea about how to work text in frames and layouts in Figma, and we will talk more about details in the future.